everyone, this is Stephanie and I'm here with Elaine Watson. She did the cover nails and color story nails for our March issue. Welcome.
Hi NAILPRO readers, glad to be here.
This spring, patterns are really a big trend and we thought it would be really cool and something very different for us to do a different pattern on each nail. We presented this idea to Elaine and she went home and collected all kinds of patterns and decals and
everything under the sun.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And brought it to the shoot.
I actually went online and I found some really good websites for patterns on wrapping paper stories. I printed everything off and literally brought, I think, a whole folder full of images to choose from.
And it was great for us to look through it all and be able to sort of map out the patterns we wanted. So you started by sculpting the nails, and I noticed that you used clear acrylic. How come you decided to do that?
I like to use clear acrylic for a lot of my nail art because what happens, especially in photo shoots, as a model turns her hands and you shoot pictures of it, sometimes you get a good artistic side of the back side of the nails. So I actually chose to do it in a clear acrylic so that should her hands be turned, you'd still see some of the artwork from the back.
The nails had a beautiful C-curve and they looked really long and lean in the final cover shot. How did you get them to be that way?
Well, one of the things that I find that's really important when doing a cover or a set of nails in nail art this busy is if you don't do them long enough and you don't do them thin enough and narrow enough, the nail art can make the nails look really fat and wide. So I used some pinching tongs that I have and I pinched a nice C-curve early in the set when it was setting up. And then I used my C-curve sticks to finish the curve. That way, when you did your cover shot, the nails did look long and lean despite how busy the patterns were.
Now, I know that you did a little trick that you might not necessarily do for salon nails, but because there were going to be so many polish changes in this, you used a gel top coat?
Yes, actually I used a gel sealer. When you change polish a lot, especially with acetone on acrylics, you have to go back and buff the surface because they get really bumpy. So because we were doing so many fast changes of colors, what I did was I used a UV Cure Gel Seal over the top of the acrylics. That way when we changed the actual polish and colors, you didn't have to go back and buff it, and it saved a lot of time.
The first nail is a combination of a floral pattern sort of and stripes. How did you start that?
Yeah, I actually did the blue first and did the whimsical kind of designs, and then we complemented it with another pattern that had some stripes and did it in the browns to give it kind of a contrasting color.
The second nail is one of my favorite nails. It was a light blue background with a brown sort of vine with swirls on it. How did you make sure that you keep your hands still enough to get that detail?
This was actually my favorite nail too. And what I did was I started with the blue background and the brown background at the bottom, and then I used the opposite colors to start the swirls up the nail. And it didn't really take a steady hand so much as I just went back and cleaned up any edges that were a little messy with the background color. So while it looks really complex and difficult, it's actually quite easy.
The third nail is a plaid, which is really cool and pretty simple and straightforward, but you had to get really thin, precise lines in there. Any tips for that?
Yeah, actually I have a tip on storing your detail brush. Every time I use my detail brush, when I'm finished, I'll take a little top coat and put it on my pointer finger and thumb and then pull the hairs so that they come to a fine point. And I'll store my brush that way. That way none of the hairs can go stray. And then when I go to use it before the next time, I'll actually take a little acetone and remove the top coat from the hairs. That way my brush stays at a perfect point every time I use it.
The next nail is a polka dot nail that is really simple but looks really cool and graphic, and I think it's something that probably could be done easily in the salon.
Yeah, the hardest part about that nail is just trying to get those circles perfect and equal in size. But again, you could just go back with your background color and go around the circles and perfect any, I don't know if they're off in shape or not quite perfect. Just go back with that background color.
We want to do something a little bit different with the pinky nail, add some texture, because all of the other nails are flat paint. What did you do for that nail?
For this one, I just painted the background color. I put the top coat over it, and while the top coat was still wet, I laid her nail into a little pot of beads that I had, and it gave it an interesting look. To protect the beads, instead of brushing on top coat over the top of the nail, what I did was I actually just touched it with the top coat, so the top coat would seep in between the beads and hold them in place during the shoot. That way we didn't have to worry about the model knocking the beads off the nail.
But if you did it in a salon, let's say a client wants something like this, you would just top coat the whole thing.
I would top coat it, or I would put down a coat of clear acrylic and use the acrylic to adhere the beads to the nail, and then do a protective or glossy coat over it, and that would be more wearable for, you know, a 2-week span between visits.
I love what you did with the thumbnail. It was sort of a different take on more dots and circles.
Yeah, I like to think of this as my retro nail. I was shopping in Hollywood recently at a furniture store and I saw this pattern on a chair and it really stood out to me. It was something that I thought I'd really like to own for my house. And it happened to be around the time that you asked me to put together patterns. So I sketched this one down on a piece of paper so I'd remember it for the shoot. And I really like how it came out. I don't tend to do everything symmetrically. I like nail art that isn't perfect and placed evenly. I like to take and throw nail art off to the side or maybe up near the cuticle rather than just in the middle and on the free edge. And this is one of those nails.
The 7th nail is another take on dots, and I love how you did this one too. It's sort of like a fisheye nail, I think we were calling it at the shoot.
Yeah, I wanted to show you can do a lot with dots. They don't just have to look like dots. I mean, we've done basically 3 patterns to show you how circles and dots can be so very different from one another, even though they're on the same set of nails. And the little white dots inside the big circles really finished that nail off and gave it a really kind of googly-eyed look and made it really fun.
The next nail is also sort of a retro 60s type nail.
Yeah, it's another good example of how old style patterns are coming back. I'm sure I've seen this pattern before on some of those children's shows I watched when I was little that depicted the 60s. But what I did was I just rounded the corners of squares and placed them overlapping each other on a kind of a terracotta background color, and it gave it that really, you know, 60s kind of retro look.
On the 2nd thumb, you added more texture to the nail again.
This is a great example of something a nail technician can do in a salon that will take no extra time added to her book if she's, you know, fully booked for the day, and still make more money on a service. And all it takes is applying your color background while that polish is still wet, sprinkling on some hexagon shaped glitter, and giving it a clear coat, and you're done. Basically takes maybe 5 minutes added onto your polish time, and you could probably get a good, I don't know, $5 or more added to your service.
And for the final nail, after looking at everything we had done, we wanted to make sure we had a nice balance of texture and dots and stripes, and at this point it looked like we could use one more set of plaids or stripes. So for the last nail you did a couple of different line designs.
Yeah, we started out with a plan to do the blue and the brown diagonal lines, but as I was doing it, I kept looking at it saying it needs a little more, it needs a little more. So we decided to throw in the terracotta stripes, and by the time we added those, I was much happier with the look of it.